Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. If I may start with questions directed to Dr. Hari on topics of lymphoma. So there are a few questions related to CAR T cell therapy, starting with the first one being the cost of it and its relevance to our country with the current costs. Dr. Hari?
Thank you, Dr. Damodar. CAR Ts are very expensive. If you think about the cost in America, the acquisition cost for the agent itself, if you buy it from a commercial company, it's in the order of $400,000. That's a lot of money. And most patients so far have actually been treated on trial, so we haven't actually felt the pinch here. In our center, we have a program of making CAR T cells from the patient in a near patient manufacturing system using the Prodigy machine. This data is accepted for publication. It will be coming out within the next few weeks, which is highly successful. We used a dual targeted CD19-20 targeting, all that. So if you have ability to do that, that can be done very cheaply. All you need is to buy the vector and the reagents, and that can bring down the cost dramatically. And many other countries are thinking about that kind of approach, which I think is the way that a society should go if we cannot afford these $400,000 drugs. It's for a single patient, for a 50% overall survival. Even if you assume a 50% cure, that's a huge burden on most societies.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hari. So I think there are 2-3 centers in India who are actually looking at starting CAR T cell based therapy and obviously trying to cut the cost and bring it somewhere in the 50 lakh range, which is about 60,000-70,000 US dollars, which is kind of affordable to a subset of patients. Right. And thereby, I'm sure that it will come up in the algorithm of management. Now, on the same thought, there are 2-3 questions which are related to, you brought up the issue of, if you've had prior exposure to Ritux, which is the standard of care now when you give R-CHOP, and then you relapse within a year, the outcome even with the auto is really bad. So in that situation, how would you position the role of auto? Would you look at a potential allo to back that up, or will you bring in CAR T in that situation?
So if you analyze the people who are early relapsers with R-based chemotherapies, R-based R-CHOP or R-EPOCH, etc., the patients who actually make it to auto do tend to be okay. So, but the vast majority don't make it to auto. That is where the failure happens, because salvage is very ineffective, and you don't have people with sensitive disease in that population. So the people who are relapsing, they don't have sensitive disease. They either have a primary refractory to salvage disease, or they are rapidly progressing, or they have residual PET positivity. So many reasons why auto will not work in that population. But the people who actually get to auto, despite the early relapse, they do very well. So if you should still do salvage, is my opinion. And you will identify that subset of patients who can go to auto in that population. They get to auto, their actual survival is actually very close to that of patients who cannot get to auto. But in that other group, that is the population where I think the CAR T versus auto trials are going to show a difference, because at least 2 of those trials, you relapse, the first thing you do is collect pherese for CAR T. Unlike, do salvage, then collect for auto, you can pherese the patient at that point before they get more lympholytic therapy. If you get more lympholytic therapy, you may not even have enough T cells to collect, and you may have a manufacturing failure for CAR T. So that's an area where CAR T will immediately slot in, because then suddenly that disease becomes much more amenable to a cure. Even a CAR T-based cure, or if they are in a PR after CAR T, I think they should go for an allo. So I think we have to come up with a better CAR T becomes the first salvage for this early relapse. The progressors on R-CHOP, the people who have a very, very short interval after R-CHOP or R-EPOCH, and especially these double hit and triple hit lymphomas, where we are actually not expecting chemotherapy to cure almost anybody. So those patients definitely, I think that's where CAR T has its best role. We should not also forget, there is, bispecifics, the CD20 bispecific that was presented at ASH had a really, really good outcome. So those are other agents that will come in that area. Then there's a CD19 ADCT, which is a molecule with CD19 conjugated with a payload, a chemo payload. So basically antibody drug conjugate. That also will be. So we will have, outside of CAR T, we'll have 2 other agents, CD20 bispecific agent and a CD19 antibody drug conjugate. So we have a little bit better salvage. So that population where the people are failing quite dramatically these days will shrink.
Okay, I have two more questions, Hari, before we move on to the myeloma, and I'll hand it over to Pankaj. So one is there a B-cell aplasia described post-CAR T-cell therapy?
Right. So there are a couple of different, actually, there was a slide in my slide set which I actually went through quickly or did not even talk about, that there are two events. One is that acutely after CAR T, when people are getting CRS, there is a small group of patients who get hemophagocytosis or HLH-like syndrome. So that's a marrow-aplasia that happens, and that needs to be treated with steroids like we do. And that is an extreme marrow stress event, and that people have to be on the watch out for that. We monitor ferritin and CRP and all that. So that's, again, we are all very good at managing that, but unless you look for it, you won't find it. That's why I'm mentioning that. The question really asks about the long-term B-cell aplasia, which, initially we thought all these patients are going to be permanently on IVIG for life. In real life, we are not seeing that. Even in the BCMA CAR T, we are not seeing that. So what happens is people run a low hypogammaglobulinemic situation. That is true. About 60% of the patients that we have treated with B-cell targeted CAR T, CD19, are actually hypogammaglobulinemic, defined as less than 400 IgG level. And initially, I used to transplant, everybody got IVIG, but IVIG is being increasingly denied by insurance in this country, and there's a shortage of IVIG. So now I give it very infrequently, every 6 weeks or 8 weeks like that, and we are managing with very few infections. Sergio has probably more experience with this, but I'm seeing that and over time, their IgG levels are actually coming up.
And I think the guidelines are coming out that it's the same CLL guidelines, that patients should be treated only if they have recurrent pulmonary infections and not just because of the number. Yeah.
Right. One question on mantle cell lymphoma. So if you had mantle cell lymphoma with the TP53 mutation, how would you kind of go about planning the treatment for this patient?
So that's a very, very difficult question and a tough thing. So again, TP53 mutation in mantle is a little bit like myeloma in that there are 2 or 3 aspects of the P53 mutation we need to consider. Some people have a subclonal mutation. So there is a big mantle clone, and the P53 is a small subclonal population. Those people should get chemoimmunotherapy and should be treated normally. But the people who do really, really poorly are the other people who have a clonal TP53 mutation, and especially people who have what we call biallelic P53 deletion, which means they don't have any P53 gene product. The protein is no longer present in their nucleus. So the cells really cannot undergo apoptosis. So these people are guaranteed to fail chemoimmunotherapy. For us, if we have the subset of patients in that group, which is a small single-digit percentage, we are actually thinking about using venetoclax upfront to get a response, and then consider allotransplant or CAR T as the first treatment. So most of them are primary refractory. They have residual disease. They don't get into CRs, and you can actually justify doing those things.
Right. Thank you, Hari. I'll now hand over to Pankaj to direct the myeloma questions, and then if there's time, we'll come back to you again.
Yes,
Pankaj?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sharad. And thank you, Dr. Sergio Giralt, for giving an overview of myeloma, how from 2-drug combination therapy in induction, we have gone to 3-drug and possibly going on to the 4-drug induction therapy. And here what, the confusion comes that possibly we are at a stage where we are transiting from 3-drug induction to 4-drug induction. So the question, which are asked are whether the major problem, in myeloma we face is the high-risk myeloma. So whether it is 17p or the other. So what do you feel that in the current scenario with the available data, should we go for 3-drug induction or for DARA-based 4-drug induction?
So that's an interesting question, and I think one that I'm going to answer in 2 parts. One is, if in the United States, for example, where you can think that you have access to all these drugs, the data is starting to emerge that 4-drug inductions may produce more deeper responses across all risk categories, that they're really, all risk categories benefit from this. And therefore, you can think about a patient with stage 1 disease, you do a 4-drug induction, that patient achieves an MRD negativity, And then you have to ask yourself the question, should I expose this patient to high-dose melphalan, or should I just continue with some form of mitigated or lower dose strategy, monitor them, and just take them to high-dose melphalan autologous transplant in the event of a relapse? You can also say, well, maybe these are the patients we should cure, we should transplant them all. Those are the types of questions that we're going to have to answer in the future. In countries with less resources, you're going to say, look, we can't do that because we just can't afford giving everybody KRD-DARA. We will have to limit it to the people who are truly high-risk disease, ISS stage 2, ISS stage 3, or people with high-risk cytogenetics. Everybody else will give a standard RVD, and only those who fail to achieve an MRD negative CR will we consider to escalate to add another class of agent as part of the post-maintenance therapy after transplant. I really view that there is a large proportion of patients, ISS stage 1, ISS stage 2, standard risk disease, that the results with RVD, high-dose melphalan, and then post-transplant lenalidomide are extremely good. And if those patients are MRD negative at the 1-year mark, the data that I haven't shown from Stamina and from the PRIMER study suggests that they are likely to stay in remission for the next couple of years. We need to also remind ourselves that there will be new technologies for us to monitor patients with myeloma beyond SPECT. Mass spectrometry monitoring of paraprotein peaks, still not ready for prime time, but it's already been published. This may be ways that we can actually monitor tumor burden to a level of 10 to the minus 4, 10 to the minus 5, without having to do a bone marrow and monitor MRD with bone marrows.
Yeah, thank you so much. You are absolutely right that in resource-constrained setting, like in India, a 3-drug induction is possibly good for standard risk patient. So here, the question which is asked is, where do you place 1Q amplification in the standard risk or in the high risk? Because what we see in resource-constrained setting is that most of the patients, they present in a late stage. So almost, when we do the FISH cytogenetics in them, we see a lot of patients, almost 40 to 50% have 1Q amplification. So what do you suggest a therapy, induction therapy and post induction therapy in them?
So unfortunately, it's like in Latin America as in India, most of our patients are presenting with advanced disease. 1Q amplification is a poor prognostic factor. ISS stage 3 is probably the worst prognostic factors of all. And then response to primary therapy is another very important prognostic factor. So I think in resource-constrained countries, you really are going to have to do, I would say, a response-assessed therapeutic algorithm. So everybody gets triple therapy, high-dose melphalan, autologous transplant, and then at the 3-month mark, depending on what the response has been, you decide whether there are going to be multiple drug consolidation, adding the monoclonal antibody. When you have CAR T cells, those are the group of patients you might think. The one advantage with CAR T cells that we're hoping will come true is that you will get in the frontline setting deep responses that will require no further therapy. And that period of time that you are drug-free is actually a period of time that you can recoup the investment you made with all the expensive drugs up front. But that remains to be proven.
All right. Thank you. One of the questions which is asked is that many patients actually present with lymphadenopathy, and they are not plasmablastic lymphoma, they are myeloma. And and sometimes they do not respond to triple therapy. So what is your strategy to treat this kind of a rare myeloma patients?
So it's interesting, Dr. Bart Balaji had always said that patients who presented with this type of lymphadenopathy, particularly with a high LDH, many of these patients would respond to multiple alkylator or multiple agent chemotherapy, such as VDT PACE-like regimens. So for many of these patients, particularly with high LDH, triple inductions, we will mobilize them with 1 or 2 cycles of VDT PACE, give them high-dose melphalan, and then give them combined therapy as maintenance. They are generally very poor prognosis.
All right, thank you. So as you already said, and this is the practice in India also, that all patients are receiving 3-drug combination therapy, IMiDs with proteasome inhibitors and dexamethasone. Now the question is that if these patients relapse, then what do you do with these patients? You mentioned about using daratumumab in these patients, but what else do you suggest to in these patients?
So Pankaj, before I answer that, Santosh had asked in the Q&A about the reference for underutilization of transplant. It's a paper of Luciano Costa, C-O-S-T-A. You can look it up. And if you don't find it, send me an email and I'll forward it to you. So I think the treatment of myeloma relapse at this time is really now challenging and one where expertise in myeloma is essential. Or looking for a second opinion with somebody who's had expertise in myeloma is always helpful for patients. It obviously depends on the patient's performance status, how they responded and tolerated prior therapy, and the efficacy of the prior therapy. But, so you can imagine that a patient who's had RVD, melphalan, and is relapsing on lenalidomide maintenance 5 years down the road is a patient that you can think about doing the same thing. RVD, second transplant, another type of maintenance with now a different proteasome, with a different maintenance strategy, either pomalidomide or a proteasome inhibitor. More challenging is the patient that now has had multiple relapse. Now, all of us have had the experience of recirculating drugs in myeloma, that we think a patient who's been exposed to lenalidomide in combination with a proteasome inhibitor, when they come back, you can still get the response to lenalidomide if you combine it with an alkylating agent or if you combine it with a monoclonal antibody. Obviously, the best strategy is to try to put these patients on a clinical trial. I think the core questions I always ask myself is, one, is this a young patient with multiply relapsed disease that I have a chance of getting long-term disease control with an allo? And I try to not, if you wait to do an allo 5 lines down the road, that patient's not going to respond. But if you do an allo within 1 to 3 prior treatments in a young patient with multiply relapsed disease, you probably can make a significant difference in their long-term outcome. The second question I ask myself is, do I have cells in the freezer? And it's really important to always remember, particularly if it's a patient that you don't know, is to ask them, do you have cells collected somewhere? Because you want to be able to utilize those cells for something. Sometimes we utilize those cells to qualify a patient for the protocol. Sometimes we use for a second autologous transplant. Who benefits from a second autologous transplant? Patients who have had a long remission, and actually patients who are refractory who really are refractory. You can get patients to respond to high-dose melphalan, and those responses can serve as a bridge to some other treatment. So I do think, the treatment of patients relapsing with relapsed myeloma now is challenging. You have to have a good understanding of what that patient's received previously and and how they tolerated it.
Yes, thank you. I think that's very important remark that you have made, that a young patient who is relapsing multiple times, it's better to push allogenic upfront rather than waiting too long in that patient. So similar question is for 17P, that what is your strategy in young patient of 17P? Do you go ahead with the tandem auto, or do you want to go ahead with an allotransplant?
So that is a long conversation with the patient. If you have a 45-year-old patient who presents with stage 3 myeloma and abnormalities of chromosome 17, to tell that patient, oh, with therapy I can give you 5 or 6 years, he's 45. So that patient is a patient where the chance of cure has to be discussed. And particularly, I think, an allotransplant in the context of a clinical trial. We recently published the long-term outcomes of both tandem autos and reduced intensity allo in the BMT-0102. And we showed that there was a benefit for auto allo in patients with high-risk disease who received an allogeneic transplant as consolidation of autologous transplant up front. There's similar data that Luciano Costa put together in a meta-analysis of all the biologically assigned trials, suggesting the same benefit for patients with high-risk disease who received allogeneic upfront. And I think at this time, we have to remember everybody has a donor. Our expectation is that patients who receive the haplotransplant and post-transplant side will have similar outcomes than if they received the match-related donor with myeloma. And I'm glad that I answered Dr. Popat's question.
Yeah, I think that answers Dr. Uday Popat as well as Dr. Rakesh Goel questions. So thank you. Coming back to the MRD, you did mention in your slides that achieving a stringent complete response within an year of treatment, these patients have a good long-term outcome. So what about the MRD now? So at what stage the patient should be MRD negative? Post-induction 4 to 6 cycles, post-transplant, post-maintenance. So where do you place MRD at what point of time?
So it's interesting, and Hari will comment a little bit about this too. We just finished analyzing the PRIMER study, which was a secondary analysis of this data from the randomized trial of tandem auto versus auto plus consolidation versus auto and just single agent lenalidomide maintenance. The STAMINA trial, in which there was no benefit so there was no difference in outcomes for patients who received tandem auto versus auto plus consolidation versus just going straight to lenalidomide. What we did see, however, that at the 1 year mark, achieving MRD or being MRD negative 1 year post-transplant had a significant benefit in overall outcome. And the highest proportion of patients who were MRD negative were actually those patients who had received the tandem transplant. Now, there are a lot of problems with the way the STAMINA trial was done that makes it difficult to make the recommendation that we should re-explore tandem transplants. We think that in patients with high-risk disease, this is a question that needs to be addressed, but definitely MRD negative at 1 year seems to make a difference. What we don't know, and this is important, we don't know if somebody who's if I convert somebody who's at 6 months MRD positive, if I can convert them to MRD negative, does that make a difference? And there's actually a series of trials using CAR T cells and using other agents trying to address the question that if you have somebody who's stable MRD positive and you convert them to MRD negative with an intervention, have you changed the natural history of that patient?
Yeah, thank you. So, Sharad, do you have more question or should I continue with myeloma?
I'll just ask 2 questions to Hari because they've just popped up. I think Hari was eager to answer this on the role of haplotransplants in both Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's. Hari?
Yeah, so haplo, the question was about haplo in lymphoma, myeloma, etc. So we don't have any randomized trials or anything, obviously, as everyone knows. But we did 2 large CIBM analysis, one in NHL and one in HL. And in both, there was lower chronic GVHD, lower acute GVHD, less non-relapse mortality, and similar overall survival for haplo in NHL. In Hodgkin lymphoma, there was also a suggestion that the haplo patients had slightly lower risk of relapse. So there's, if you look at it, it's about hundreds of patients in these analyses, and actually it's really, really good data for doing haplo. So I have and these are all haplos done in the PostSci platform. So really, that's excellent data. In fact, for many patients with Hodgkin's, that's one of the things that I think about upfront. We do very little Hodgkin's allos now because of PD checkpoint inhibitors and brentuximab, etc. For myeloma, we have again, one thing we have proven is that with haplos in myeloma, the non-relapse mortality has gone down dramatically. But the sad part about haplo in myeloma is that it is, just as Sergio said, almost all of that is done way, way, way late after patients has had 3 or 4 relapses. At that point, the haplos just gives you a little bit of time, in a few months, because patients are going to relapse. Relapse is our biggest risk. In haplo in myeloma, compared to the other platforms, the NRM is significantly lower. These are all reduced intensity haplos, post-Cy, but you really have to have a follow-up plan. So when we do it, it is mainly for our African American patients, and I have a lot of people who we have done haplos on in the first relapse or second relapse, who then have an agent to go back to. At that time, Dara was a new drug. Most of them were Dara sensitive. We would put them back on Dara as maintenance, and many of those patients are now 5 and 6 years out without any problems.
Okay, one more question, Hari. What are the options for somebody who relapses post-CAR T cell therapy?
So post-CAR T-cell relapses are primarily, we think, from three reasons. One is that antigen, loss of antigen. So CD19 can go away, BCMA can disappear. Second is T-cell exhaustion, senescence, and disappearance. So T-cells have an AUC, they tend to go down with time. And sometimes they are senescent or exhausted, they don't spike back up when the antigen starts reappearing as the tumor grows back. And finally, the third group is there is something wrong with the microenvironment. So this microenvironment type problems, you can actually, many people have done additional agents to stimulate the T cells. Classic would be a checkpoint blocker. So there's a lot of trials and a lot of anecdotal data that you could do that for people who are relapsing in a very slow, not a clear-cut explosive relapse, but a slow relapse. And you can actually buy some time that way. However, again, if the patient has not had an auto transplant in the first round for a lymphoma, they have a CAR T and then they're failing, you really definitely should be considering an auto transplant at that point, because that is still standard of care and we really should not abandon it. My bias for younger patients would be to think about an allo, and especially with the reduction in NRM these days. So younger patients, I would certainly think about an allo for those patients with some salvage before, and for older patients, probably even just doing auto.
Thank you, Hari. Pankaj, back to you if you have any more questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharad. Yeah. So can we discuss something about the carfilzomib? The good point is that generic carfilzomib is available in India, and there are a couple of questions on carfilzomib. Now, people are disappointed with the results of VRD versus KRD. So there were a lot of hope that KRD would be winner, but it has come as equal. But then obviously the question is that the high-risk patients were not included in the trial. So what is your opinion in the high-risk myeloma patients? Do you think that the KRD upfront would be a winner, or should we wait for more results?
So I remember these are drugs, they're not horses. So there's no, the winners should be our patients. And, we should just, the data is the data. If I had a high-risk patient now, I would try to put them on a study where they would get a 4-drug induction, some form of high-dose consolidation, and some form of novel post-transplant consolidation with some form of cellular therapy. As Hari mentioned, there will be BiTEs for myeloma. There will be CAR T cells for myeloma. I do think we need to incorporate those into our algorithms for the high-risk patients, particularly for patients, less than 80 years of age. I mean, we really should the myeloma field should be proud of the success it has had of tripling the expected survival. But I do think that our challenge for the next years to come is to how can we do this in a way that's sustainable and that actually affordable. And I actually think that a lot of our resource-constrained colleagues will actually teach us how to do this in a way that will be financially responsible.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe I should go a little bit more specific. Do you think the dose of carfilzomib makes the difference whether you use 36 mg per meter square or 56 or 70 once weekly, twice weekly? So can you make some comments on the dose?
I currently do 56 milligram per meter squared weekly, 3 weeks on, 1 week off. I've had, particularly with older patients with 70 milligram per meter squared, you get into trouble very quickly. I don't do carfilzomib as a AA. I do it as a triple with either, when you're doing it in the salvage setting, you're usually doing Carpom Dex. So you're doing it in combinations with other agents. We have an interesting study we're doing with Hari called the Second Chance Study, where we're doing KRD Dara for 4 cycles, a second transplant, and then another KRD Dara for 4 cycles. We're getting very high response rates. We're now trying to see what the maintenance for those patients are. This is in the setting of patients who failed 1 to 3 lines of therapy. So I think to your question is, carfilzomib, what dose? I would say 56 milligram per meter squared weekly is what I use the most. In combination with what? I think, in a patient who has failed an IMiD, you probably should combine it with an alkylating agent although we've seen patients who are failing lenalidomide have dramatic responses to Carpom-Dex. Cardera-Dex is an extremely active regimen, and I think if you can add another drug, it also works better.
Thank you. I think there is a signal coming up for wrapping up the discussion. So over to the Dr. Goyal.
Thanks very much to the speakers, the participants, and the audience for this lively and very instructive session. See you again in September. And I would like to have the stage to Dr. Matthews for his concluding remarks. You're on mute.
So I'm sorry. I want to thank Indus PMT and the speakers. Thank you so much, Hari and Sergio, for taking the time and doing this and providing us an excellent overview on the topics. Thank you so much once again.
It was a true pleasure.
Thanks to all the participants and the chairpersons who conducted the questions, Sharad and Pankaj. Thank you for coming on, and to all the participants. And finally, I want to thank Emcure for facilitating this meeting.